We are just one day away from Super Tuesday, where more than a third of all available delegates are up for grabs. Former President Donald Trump is expected to further his lead over former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley after tomorrow night. According to a new CBS News poll, Trump also leads President Biden, in a hypothetical head-to-head rematch. We're going to dig into those numbers later, but first, news of the day. It wasn't always a guarantee that Trump would remain on certain primary ballots. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed a Colorado Supreme Court decision that had barred the former president from the state's primary ballot due to his actions on January 6th. And that's where we begin tonight. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford joins us now to discuss all of this. Jan, thank you for being here. So it was really interesting to actually hear this case as it played out. It was all over cable news and all over the nets. So people really got to listen to these arguments. But can you walk us through how the court arrived at this decision?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the Colorado Supreme Court was the first court in the country to look at this obscure provision of the 14th Amendment and say it was going to find that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist because of his actions around January 6th. And then as a result of that constitutional clause, he could be disqualified from the Colorado ballot. And then after they did that, it was kind of like dominoes, right? You saw like Maine and Illinois and all these other states going like, wait a minute, we want to do that too. So Trump went to the Supreme Court and said, please take up this case. Like you said, they had arguments last month and everyone was listening there. And I think it was clear from those arguments that the justices were like, wait a minute, we cannot have a scenario where a handful of states could dictate the outcome of a presidential election. That's just not a state role for a state court. And so that was the decision we got today, kind of what we expected from those arguments last month. The court was unanimous that the Colorado Supreme Court got it wrong. They just had slightly different reasons and some heated language for how they got to that outcome.
I wanted to ask about that because the liberal justices of the court wrote a separate opinion. What did they say in that opinion?
Yeah, I mean, like, keep in mind, like, they all agree Colorado Supreme Court is wrong and Trump should win this case. But the three liberals wrote separately and said basically that the conservatives, and 5 of the conservatives were in this majority decision, that they'd gone too far. And they decided issues they didn't need to decide, and that the court was all in agreement that it would be chaos if states could do this, that, and the other. And so they all agree there. But then they said that the majority went on and decided things like what should Congress's role be and these other things. And that prompted Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who is a conservative, didn't join the conservatives' opinion, to write a decision of her own saying essentially like, guys, we all agree on this. Why are we amplifying our disagreements in this time? As a court, we should be trying to tone down the national temperature. So it was really a fascinating window, I think, into like some of these disagreements behind the scenes playing out in the writing. And I got to tell you, I mean, this is a court that today there was agreement, there was unanimity on the outcome, and you still saw them fracturing and on the result, on the reasoning. And I don't think that really bodes well for some of these upcoming cases that are hugely controversial, where they're definitely going to have different views on the outcome.
And cases that are going to play such an outsized role in a election year. I mean, taking up abortion medication, mifepristone later.
And then the big
Trump's
one in April,
case.
whether or not Jack Smith, the special counsel, can even try President Trump for some of those actions and potentially allegedly trying to overthrow, the election. So, that's all on the horizon. This is going to be a really difficult, controversial term for these justices to work through. So, today, I mean, yes, we've got unanimity on the outcome, and the Colorado Supreme Court's wrong, and this ends those state efforts. The Super Tuesday goes forward. Trump's on the ballot. It's going to end all those efforts, but they're still arguing back and forth among themselves.
On the reasoning. Yeah, it's kind of like the top line of a poll, but you dig down at the numbers and you really see some disagreements there.
Or like you're saying, like, guys, just straighten up and like, let's move on from this one. They couldn't do it, though. They couldn't come to like that unanimous decision.
Well, interesting point too, especially as these cases are coming up. We'll see what they decide and how they decide it. Jan Crawford, as always, thank you very much for your time. And Colorado's Secretary of State Jena Griswold is here with us now to discuss this case. Secretary Griswold, thanks so much for being here. I wanted to get your immediate reaction to this ruling.
Thanks for having me on. First and foremost, I'm grateful that there is a decision. It's important that Coloradan and American voters all across the country know whether or not Trump is qualified as we go into Super Tuesday. But I'll also say I'm disappointed. It should be up to Colorado or any state to determine whether oath breaking insurrectionists go onto our ballots. And ultimately, this case will allow federal candidates who are oath breaking insurrectionists to get onto ballots without much question. That's because the Supreme Court has left it up to Congress to determine whether to pass a law or take action on oath breakers that are federal candidates. And with this Congress, that is very unlikely.
Well, I want to ask a little more about that in a minute, but to your point about this decision and the immediate impact, is there anything else that your state can do to challenge Trump being on the ballot?
At this point, no. Ultimately, this is a novel case. We have never had a president try to hold on to power and steal the presidency. It was filed by 6 voters who are Republicans and unaffiliated in our state courts and worked its way up. My job as Secretary of State is to uphold the law and the Constitution. And that means in this instance that Trump is a qualified candidate on our ballot and votes cast for him will be counted.
So voters can have the confidence that Trump will appear on that ballot. The court's decision, interestingly, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but the enforcement of that insurrection clause in the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court says that that's up to Congress, not the states. I'm curious what you make of that.
Well, I disagree with that part of the opinion. I think it should be up to states to determine whether oath-breaking insurrectionists go onto our ballots. But the Supreme Court has issued its decision. I think that the bigger picture is that January 6th was just part of Donald Trump's attempt to steal the presidency. He broke the law. He incited that violent mob onto the Congress with the attempt to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And his attacks on democracy have not stopped. They have led to election security threats, threats against election workers, voter suppression laws across this country considered, and already MAGA extremists are trying to sow doubt in the 2024 election.
I'm curious, though, because this was a 9-0 ruling, do you have any regrets or things you wish that the state would have done differently in pressing this case, given that we saw the former president today really celebrate this ruling? And of course, the Supreme Court is taking up presidential immunity soon as well. Do you feel like this ruling today may have given him kind of a national boost?
I'm disappointed in the ruling. I obviously did believe that the Colorado Supreme Court got it right. But the ruling is the ruling, and I think it's important that we all respect justices' decisions. At the end of the day, Donald Trump is facing 91 felony counts in 4 separate cases. He continues to attack democratic institutions, and it will be up to American voters to really safeguard democracy in November.
All right, Jena Griswold, we thank you very much for your time.